Hi Mark, lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me. You're clearly a man of many talents and many strings to your bow. How planned was what you wanted to do and where you are now? Or has it been just kind of, you're a man who grabs opportunities that have come along and experienced literally every facet of life?
Well, it's very kind of you to describe me in that way. I've been incredibly lucky. I did a degree that I really loved, archaeology and ancient history. I was going to be a marine archaeologist or a pro golfer. I was a mad keen golfer when I was young. Yeah. But my dear old dad said, get a proper job. So I joined the John Lewis Partnership as a graduate trainee. And every 2 years they kept promoting me, and I worked with them for 34 years. I was just incredibly fortunate that I really enjoyed the company. I enjoyed its values. I liked the people that I worked with. I got a chance to do loads of other things. So I chaired business in the community. I was deputy chairman of Channel 4. I set up the Prince's Countryside Fund for the Prince of Wales. And there was just a great richness. And then when I retired from the partnership, I was asked by David Cameron to join the government and to be Minister of State for Trade and Investment. And the remarkable thing about that is that he appointed me 5 months before the Brexit referendum. And then for the year after that, I travelled the world every week trying to persuade different governments around the world to extend their trade deals with the UK and set up new ones. I've always enjoyed writing, so I've written now 6 books, business books, food books, and children's books. And I've built a digital business to help people understand how happy they are at work and improve it. And then to boot, I chair Fair Trade in the UK. So I do have a pretty eclectic list of things that I do.
And do you kind of, I suppose my question is, have you always been driven to do new stuff, and how much do you set your sights on the stuff you're looking to do, or how much is it the chance that come to you?
Well, I'm curious by nature. I always have been. I used to drive my parents mad because I'd always ask them questions, and in the end they'd tell me to shut up. And at school and at university I was always the same, and in business I always wanted to know why we do things the way we do them, and couldn't we do them better. And I've never been driven by a great master plan for myself. I've always been curious, and when things were offered to me, I tended to accept them and then really get stuck into them. So I have no great life plan, but with what I've learned now, what I want to try to do is to help people have a happier and a more enjoyable time at work. I want to measure that globally. I want to measure it by industry, and try and give back in some way some of the things that I've learned through having a very fortunate career.
So, and we'll come back to the Happiness Project a bit, because it's fascinating and we'll explore that more. Let me just ask about, you've gone from business to politics, which is kind of, for someone consciously to do that maybe is quite rare in our society today. How do you find the differences between the two worlds, and have you enjoyed it, or are there similarities, or are they completely different entities?
Well, I hugely enjoyed both of them, but they are completely different. You'll hear a lot of people say, oh, government should be more like business, but it really can't be. I wish I had time to explain. But MPs are voted for by their local constituents. Although they're members of a party and sit under that umbrella, they have to think independently as well, because what they're keen on being is re-elected. So I rather think of them as individual franchisees underneath a fascia, rather than being part of a party machine. There's a huge amount of compromise in politics. I often think it would be like when I was running Waitrose, if every morning I had to sit in front of the bosses of Tesco, Sainsbury's, Morrison's and Asda, and they quizzed me on what Waitrose was doing. Yeah. And then when they'd quiz me and I'd answered questions, the press would come in and they'd quiz me. And then when they'd quiz me, the NGOs would all quiz me. And then after they'd all quiz me all morning, I would go and try to do my job, and the following day it'd be repeated. So the level of scrutiny that you're under on a daily basis is of a different order to anything that you face in the business world. And there are people who are called the loyal opposition, who are trying to find fault in everything you say and trip you up. Yeah. And you just don't get that in the business world in the same way. And so just on those 2 points alone, they're fundamentally different worlds in the way that they work.
So do you think your business background has helped you, or has it almost frustrated you in the world of politics?
Well, I worked in the John Lewis Partnership, which is owned by all the people that work in it, so it has a democratic base. And so in that, we used to share information, we empowered people, there were committees and councils. So I had a feel for listening and compromise, and that was really important in government. So I didn't feel uncomfortable in that world. David Cameron asked me to do 2 years. I did slightly less than that, only because of the timing of where we were at with Brexit negotiations. But I learnt a lot from it, and I enjoy now sitting in the Lords. I enjoy taking part in debates. I'm currently working on a committee looking at intergenerational fairness, and that has peers from all the different parties. And so listening to all different perspectives, writing a report which will hopefully help improve the lives of different generations is really fulfilling. But you have to think about things in a different way. The pace is slower, you have to listen more, you have to compromise more, you have to understand others' points of view.
And I think it leads neatly onto the Happiness Project and what you're currently doing now. How did that come about? Give us the background.
Well, when I left the John Lewis Partnership, I wrote a book called Fairness for All, and it was really about the principles that underlie the John Lewis Partnership and in practice how that works. And I also brought into the book my experiences of being chairman of business in the community and how other businesses involved their employees to get more from them. When I got towards the end of the book, I wrote a chapter called If You Really Care About Engaging Your Workforce and Getting them the Benefits, You'll Want to Measure It. So I started to think about, how do I measure this? And it was then I talked to a brilliant young woman who owned a tech business, and I said to her, look, I want to devise a survey that anybody can take across the world. And what I would like to do is to allow people to do a simple survey that at the end shows them how happy they are at work across 6 different areas compared to people that look like them, and then recommends how they might choose to improve their workplace happiness. So to date, I've had over 100 companies use the survey. Tens of thousands of individuals have signed up and taken the survey in 132 countries now across 25 sectors. So what I have is a rich source of data that allows me to understand at a quite granular level, by age, by gender, by ethnicity, by work type, by country, how people feel about their working environment.
And do you have a positive outlook on it? Is it good? Are people happy? Or
well, there's a real mixture. Overall, I can tell you that the global happiness level today is 654 out of 1,000. I can tell you the happiest country is Austria. I can tell you that last year, for the first time that we measured, women were happier than men at work in the United Kingdom. I can tell you millennials that are in non-management position are happier than millennials in management positions, which is a rather strange thing to be able to draw out. So I've just got a huge amount of data now about how people feel about their workplace. And I measure 6 things. I measure reward and recognition, information sharing, empowerment and trust, well-being, whether people have a sense of pride in what they do, and job satisfaction, which is really about the relationship you have with your manager and career development. And through all of those things, what I can do is put together data and analysis that shows by age group, by ethnicity, by company, who are most and least happy.
And do you think the workplaces overall, both from your studies and also anecdotally for yourself, we are moving to a better place? We are kind of a world where we're being more transparent, and we're opening up ourselves in terms of mental health, in terms of kind of activity within the workplace, such that actually people are getting opportunities and people are enjoying themselves more? Or do you think we've got a long way to go?
I think we've got a long way to go. The amazing thing about Speed and Lewis, who set up the John Lewis Partnership, is that 100 years ago, he set out that the supreme purpose of the John Lewis Partnership should be the happiness of the people that work there. Yeah. And happiness sounds a really woolly thing, all people should be happy. Yeah. But what he did is he began to codify what that meant. And he talked about people being fairly paid, people being recognised, people having information openly shared with them, thinking about the well-being of the individuals that work in the organisation, empowering people so they have responsibility. And he figured a long time ago that if people feel happy and engaged, they'll work harder. And now all the academic evidence says that sick absence is lower, staff turnover is lower in those companies with the most engaged workforces. But also productivity is 20% higher, profits is 20% higher, wastage is 43% lower. Earnings per share, 134% higher. So there is a definite correlation between a happy and engaged workforce and commercial success. So my view has been for a time now, and drawn out by the work that I do, that a happy and engaged workforce is good for the individual, it's good for their mental health, it's good for the company, profits, productivity, but it's good for society as well. And I think that's one of the antidotes to this feeling globally that somehow the world is unfair, somehow capitalism isn't inclusive, that the well-off are doing very well, but the others aren't. So my view is that that kind of approach of caring for your workforce, thinking about their well-being, drives better performance, but also creates a more inclusive society.
So John Lewis is held in high esteem, and kind of both obviously in the UK, but also across the world. And it treats everyone the same, and kind of it's an amazing company. Why do more companies not do that? Why do not more companies act that way?
Well, I think lots of companies do. Lots of companies embrace aspects of the John Lewis Partnership. And when I wrote Fairness for All, I set out examples from Unilever and Unipart and Virgin, where they take the John Lewis principles and they interpret them and deliver them in a different way, but all with the same end, about involving their workforce and employees in making the business better. One of the challenges, though, that people have with the John Lewis Partnership is the founder took all of the shares and put them in the trust for the benefit of the employees. And of course, a lot of privately held companies or family businesses would say, why would I want to do that? So what I try to explain, both in my book and when I speak, is how any business can embrace all of the principles that the John Lewis Partnership embraces, and others, in terms of engaging their people, without necessarily having to take all of the shares and give them to all the people that work in the business at that moment in time.
And do you think well, obviously as individuals we are all receptive to this because we want to be happy. Do you think companies are receptive to this? They might in parts be, or generally across the board, all companies aspire to deliver?
Well, I think for some companies, Nick, it's counterintuitive. The first written text around happiness goes back to Socrates 2,500 years ago, and Socrates said there are two forms of happiness. There's a happiness that comes from success, wealth, achieving things, and there is a higher level of happiness that comes from altruism, doing the right thing. Aristotle, 100 years after Socrates, said that every action of every human being is predicated on their personal need for happiness. And he was challenged by a senator, and the senator said to Aristotle, "I just don't believe you, that's not right." And Aristotle said to him, "Okay, you're standing for the Senate, you're standing for election." He said, "Yes." He said, "Well, why are you standing for election?" He said, "Well, because I want to get into the Senate." He said, "Why do you want to get into the Senate?" He said, "Because I want power." He said, "Well, why do you want power?" He said, "Because it will make me happy."
Right.
And the reality is that each of us as individuals drive for that happiness. Now, from a business context, there are some people who think that happiness is a fluffy, woolly kind of thing that isn't going to make their organisations better. But extensive academic research says that if you have a happy, engaged workforce, people will work harder, they'll stay longer, they take less time off sick, profit is higher, productivity is higher, etc., etc. So there are real benefits in having a happy and engaged workforce. And it's not a soft option. It's not happy clappy. It's understanding whether people feel they're paid fairly, whether they're recognised when they do something well, whether they've got the information to do their job, whether information is shared freely, whether they feel empowered to get on and make decisions so that you can recognise them for making good decisions, whether they feel trusted, whether they feel that an organisation cares for their well-being, whether they have a sense of pride in what they do every day, whether they feel that they're being developed as an individual, whether they have a good relationship with their line manager. These are really practical things that make either for a happy and engaged individual at work or a disaffected. I said disinfected.
Someone who's not clean.
Somebody who's not clean quite. So it's really important that people feel happy and they don't feel disaffected when they're at work.
So for you, in terms of the happiness project, the happiness survey, are you targeting businesses or are you targeting individuals?
Well, I target both. So I work now with over 100 businesses across all sectors, and I can tell them how they compare to other organisations in the same sector, but also other sectors.
For you, what's your personal aim for it? Is it kind of to educate an individual as to how they could be happier because they can compare themselves to across industries and across sectors and everything like that, or is it for you? To educate companies about how they can be better, about actually them understanding that actually if they look after their workforce, they'll be able to achieve far more. So personally for you, and I appreciate you saying everything, but I'm going to push you.
No, I mean, all I want to do is try and make the world a little bit happier.
Okay.
And I want to make the world a little bit happier because I think it's good for the individual, I think it's good for business, and I think it's good for society. So I've built Engaging Work so that any individual anywhere in the world can go and do the survey, take 7 minutes, and at the end of it, it will give them some guidance about where in their workplace they're most and least happy and give them some practical advice. Now, for companies, I can do exactly the same with the point of view of improving staff turnover or reducing staff turnover, reducing sick absence, increasing productivity, because the workforce are more engaged and more empowered. So I feel that I can help both individuals and I can help companies through the work that I've done. And I now have a huge database built up over 2 years, and I can tell you by sector, by country, by job type, by ethnic group, by age, by management level, who are the most and the least happy. And I can also tell you why they're more or less happy than others that you might compare them to.
So are there, and in all your data and probably kind of the analysis you've done, if there was an area, if there was a sector or a level or something that you could go and talk to and point out to them, who would you like to spend some time with? Who do you feel is just missing the point the most?
Well, I think one of the most fascinating comparisons for me is the difference between the retail sector and the hospitality sector. Okay. So retail scores second lowest in terms of engagement in the workforce, but the hospitality sector is the third highest. Okay. And what's fascinating is you'd expect them to be about the same. Yeah. I've done a lot of work on women in the workplace and those areas where women feel empowered and listened to and where they don't, which sectors that applies to. I've done a lot of work with millennials across sectors, so how do millennials feel today? Do they feel listened to? And one of the most fascinating things with millennials is that millennials in non-management jobs are happier than millennials in management jobs. So I work across groups, I work across sectors, I work across countries. I can tell you the top 11 happiest countries in the country. I can only, I'd say I can tell you 11 because the UK is 10 and Ireland is 11. And I can tell you that the happiest is Austria. The French are above us, the Germans are above us, the Nordics are above us, the USA is number 9. And I can tell you why those countries are scoring more highly than in the UK, why their workforce is more engaged and happier.
One last question for you, which is something you didn't touch on in terms of your career, but I've got to ask it. You also developed Foolish King, the chess app.
Yeah.
How did that come about? So you're also a top app developer.
Yeah. Well, when my eldest daughter was 6, I was teaching her how to play chess, and she was struggling with all the pieces and the moves, and we were sitting in the garden on a summer day, and so I turned all the pieces into butterflies and ants and worms. So worms wriggle and go sideways, and ants can go forward and can't go back, and butterflies hop like the knights in chess. So I wrote this story, and a number of years later, a publisher who published my food book said to me, "Do you have anything else?" And I showed them this manuscript. And they put me onto a brilliant children's publisher called David Fickling, who said, "I really like what you've done, I'd like to publish it." So I worked on it and eventually published it. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be fun to make this into an app? So I met a very brilliant woman who owned a tech company, and I said, I'd like to make this into a fun app for children, which I did about 3 years ago, and now I've got about 50,000 children around the world playing chess against each other, learning chess, getting tutorials. It's the first in a number of books that I've written about the world's great strategic board games, which I'll release over the next few years.
With the apps to...
with the apps as well. So the great thing about abstract strategy games like chess or like Go, or a whole host of others, Nine Men's Merrill and Drafts, Mancala in Africa. There's a game called Sukatra in Indonesia, but there are about 9 around the world strategy games which are abstract strategy. By that, what it means is that there's obviously no luck, there's no roll of a dice. But after the first few moves, there are billions of permutations of moves. So after the first 4 moves in chess, there are a possible 1 billion permutations of moves that can be made. So anybody learning to play those games has to think not only about the move they're going to make, but the move that their opponent's going to make, and then probably think about the move that they're going to make to their opponent's move. And the greatest chess players and drafts players in the world are thinking about 16 moves ahead. So for me, with my daughters, what I was trying to do was to teach them the skill of thinking ahead, not just thinking in the moment about what you want to do as a reaction to something, but how will somebody react to your reaction and how will you react to their reaction, so that you start to think things through. I think it's a really important skill for children to have, but I think it's a really important skill to have in both business and politics too.
And on that note, Mark, thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome.